This is the Asia Climate Capital podcast hosted by me, Joseph Jacobelli. The series is dedicated to discussing and analyzing business and finance topics around the energy transition and decarbonisation in Asia, with the capital markets in mind. Welcome to episode 10 of the Asia Climate Capital podcast, recorded on June 16, 2022. Today is an important discussion. It's about Australia evolving into a regional or even global clean energy leader from being a laggard. The Australian energy market may be small by Asian standards, but it has a leading global place in the energy markets. Innovation, ample capital, and a new clean energy-friendly government is going to change things quite a bit. Our guest is one of the region's prominent thought leaders, Tim Buckley, who heads the Australian-based think tank Climate Energy Finance. I first asked Tim about his journey to becoming an active participant in Asia's decarbonisation. Then, we evaluate the current state of clean energy in Australia and have a very honest discussion on the opportunities and challenges in the sector. Finally, Tim offers some thoughts about the shape of things to come over the next 28 years. I should add that we recorded this interview right in the middle of one of Australia's most serious energy crises historically. Please note all opinions are personal and do not reflect those of present or past employers. Enjoy the show. I'm very excited to have Tim Buckley today. Tim is one of the leading experts in the energy landscape in Asia, if not globally. And I'm very excited about him talking about, what's happening in Australia and some of the kind of repercussions what's happening in Australia for the rest of Asia. So welcome, Tim.
Excellent. Thanks, Joseph. Great to be here. And I will definitely talk about Australia, but also happily talk about India, a market I'm equally passionate about and which has many contrasts and similarities with Australia and sort of straddles the Asian hemisphere. And I think both countries are likely to be renewable energy superpowers in their own right. So we'll draw on India and Australia to keep
Great.
it.
We get two for the price of one, even better. And it is the Asia Climate Capital podcast. So having two Asian countries is great. But first of all, I wanted to kind of not so much you introducing yourself, but if you could share with the listeners, what has been your path towards decarbonization? I mean, in the sense of from a work perspective. I mean, how did you get into it in the past few years?
Yeah, I've travelled an unusual road for my sins. For 20 years, I was 17 years at Citigroup. I was managing director, head of equity research. I did work in Asia at Deutsche Morgan Grenfell up in Singapore for a couple of years, and so I have a background in finance, and at the time, Citigroup was the biggest bank in the world. I had a rather unfortunate or fortunate conversation, managed to get myself sacked by the CFO by saying we were headed towards a cliff and the board was asleep at the wheel, and they were. The stock did drop 98% within 2 years of me leaving. So I called that one right. It's probably one of the best career moves I made in my life because I got all my stock freed up when they retrenched me on spot. But that then gave me the freedom now to reassess my career. So having been very much part of the global financial system and studying how equity markets were working, I found it a fascinating sector. I'm certainly fascinated by financial markets and the power of the financial markets, but it always left me somewhat bewildered. I mean, at the end of the day, there's no moral compass. The sole purpose test everyone works for maximising risk-adjusted returns. And unfortunately, the equity market has a very myopically short-term focus. So, put that aside, it's a lovely, exciting place to work, but it doesn't exactly give you a lot of moral fortitude. And that's probably the other end of the spectrum where I've ended up now. I had a rather interesting direction change thanks to a very good mate of mine who set up a global clean energy technology investment fund, and he had one of the big banks in Australia offer to fund his fund, but he needed someone to come in and partner with him. So he rang me up and asked me to join him. I did. We set up a very small global technology fund. The logic was pretty straightforward. Where there's a risk, there's an opportunity. Let's look at the technology opportunity. Once I got into it, that was I had a chat to the chairman of the company. He was the chair of one of the biggest financial institutions in Australia, and I asked him why he was helping a 2-bit little minnow, a startup. And his comment was, well, I don't know about climate change, but what I do know is energy security drives all countries globally, always has, always will. And if we solve climate change as well, great, but I'm not sure about that. Now, that was 15 years ago. I did remind him of that conversation 2 years ago, and he just laughed. He said, I still don't understand climate change, but anyway, energy security absolutely drives every country all the time. And we'll get into that. But running this fund, I mean, it was a tiny little startup fund, but we ended up closing it down because the volatility in the technology sector, we're investing in global technology leaders. The volatility as the technologies were developing, it was way, way too high for my interest and my capacity. But what I did have was the privilege of studying and investing in Chinese energy technology world leaders, and it really opened my up. I mean, I had a very biased Western perspective. Of course, the West is most powerful, China's a laggard, blah, blah, blah. And you go in and you talk to the CEOs of the Chinese companies, and they were a decade ahead of the West. And what staggered me was the West had no idea. So it wasn't like they were trade secrets. You could go and talk to the CEOs, you could read their annual reports, you could look at what they were doing. I mean, I remember we're investing in a smart meter company, and China State Grid said, we're going to build 380 million smart meters in the next 5 years. And they did. 60 million one year, 65 the next year, 70, and they did it. No Western country's ever done anything like that. And I just remember watching that go, well, hang on, here's something the West is totally asleep at the wheel at. There is a huge global energy transition happening. China's leading, and most people in the West don't understand it. So I went back. When we closed down the technology fund, I actually started up a think tank, and the logic was to actually work in Australia's national interest and highlight to people that the energy decarbonisation, the energy transformation was global. It was happening far faster than we knew, and China was leading, and Australia could be a world leader, still could be. A decade later, we've managed to fail to grasp the opportunities the way the Chinese have, but I still think Australia is a blessed country. We've got more natural land resources, wind, solar, hydro than any other country. And so we'll come back to that. But what it really opened to my eyes to was the magnitude of technology disruption, the fact that it was China leading it, not America. And the Europeans have obviously led for a long time, but the Chinese have obviously taken that technology, added massive economies of scale, driven the cost down like no other industry I'd ever studied other than mobile phones or the internet. And so I just saw another internet boom, bust, bubble, whatever you want to call it, transformation, because you get the highs, you get the lows, and then you get the absolute fundamental shift in every aspect of energy markets. And we're now in that shift. So anyway, a long intro, but investing in China really opened my eyes up to it. So a decade later, I thought, after doing that for 4 or 5 years, I started a public interest think tank that invested in Australia and India and Asia and explored the opportunities and just tried to shout about them and say, look, this is a great opportunity. It's a climate crisis, but it is where there's a crisis, there's an opportunity. And the technology disruptions sort of surprised everyone, including me. But I've sort of started every presentation for a decade talking about rampant, accelerated deflation in wind, solar, batteries, electric vehicles, every presentation for a decade, and I've been surprised by the rate of deflation. Now, even in the last 12 months, you might think, hang on, we've got renewable prices going up, but what you've got is fossil fuel prices going up fivefold. And so, in fact, renewables today are relatively cheaper than they were a month ago and phenomenally cheaper than they were a year ago versus the incumbent industry. So the disruption is still happening. It's happening at an amazing speed, and Asia leads and has huge opportunity to to leapfrog technologies and benefit from it, because it is energy security. That was originally the argument I got involved in. It's energy security for India, for China, Japan, for Korea, for all of the Asian countries that are importers of fossil fuels. It's a big threat to my country. We're the third biggest exporter of fossil fuels in the world. So our government's played small target and climate denialism for way too long. But what they're really doing is just buying time for the incumbent fossil fuel industry majors to milk another decade of profits and exports out of it. And Australia's prime position to benefit from Russia's implosion post the invasion of Ukraine. But Australia is right up there with Saudi Arabia and Russia in terms of the fossil fuel global mafia. And so my country is very exposed, but we also have a lot of opportunity. So I'll stop there.
Well, I mean, one of the reasons why I was very excited talking to you is because everything that you said, absolutely, I don't only 300% agree with it, but on top of it, I spent 1.5 years of my life writing a book about it, which was published last year. So I put my time where my mouth is, so to speak. That's a good segue to the second part of our discussion, which is really the current state of affairs in Australia. And I think you already mentioned kind of some of the key points. You've had a federal government, which hasn't been very supportive. Actually, probably didn't get the fact that it could have made a huge difference in terms of Australia's role in the clean energy massive boom globally. But Australia still did reasonably okay despite the lack of support from the federal government. So could you talk a little bit about that, about kind of like the government, the private, public, private kind of dynamics there, and also the kind of like the state of, not just the state of affairs of the political side, but also what's happening on the clean energy side in Australia. And I am aware, by the way, we're recording this, as I mentioned earlier, on the 15th of June, and there is a little bit of a minor energy crisis in Australia. I mean, like basically the market has just stopped. But that's, I think, another podcast. So if you could tell us a little bit about the kind of federal government, state government dynamics, and also tell us about the clean energy kind of state in Australia right now.
Yeah, it's a long story. I used to say that almost every country in the world was ruled by energy security threats, and I always used to say Australia was the exception because we're blessed with uranium, we're blessed with hydro, wind, solar, LNG, coal. We've got everything, and we've got more land, and we've got low population density, we've got a great financial system. We've got every opportunity in the world. We've got more lithium than any other country almost in the world. We're the 48% of the world's lithium production, and that's without a government program to develop lithium. So we are the lucky country despite our politicians, and thank God for that, because if a country was based on our politicians, we'd be absolutely a third world country. But we have had a disastrous federal government for the best part of 5 or 10 years. They were in party ruling for 9 years. We've had energy policy chaos from the federal government. You mentioned the states have been forced to start to lead because the federal government was doing such a bad job. So we have what's called the national electricity market, and we'll come back to the crisis that's unfolding as we speak. But the national electricity market on the east coast of Australia is a construct that emerged over the last 20, 30 years where the individual states were responsible for energy, but it's a lot easier to manage a national market than a state-based independent market. You've got more reliability, strength through exports and imports across borders and so on. We put a national electricity system in place that was absolutely breaking down over the last 3 years. Because the states were committed to Paris, they were committed to decarbonisation, net zero by 2050, 50% renewables by 2030, yet the federal government was a climate science denier. They were funded by the fossil fuel mafia. They are undermined, there's regulatory capture, all sorts of excuses, donations, brown paper bags filled with $1 million at a time, and I say that deliberately, literally $1 million in one brown paper bag was given to the Attorney General of Australia, and it was acceptable. Right? That's criminal in my view, but anyway, don't get me really fuming. Fortunately, we had a federal election 3 weeks ago, and that has changed everything. So we've had a two-party system in Australia. It's actually just broken, and we've now got a four-party system or a five-party system. We've got the Liberal Nationals, we've got the ALP, the Labor Party. They were the two dominant parties. The Greens now have the control of our upper house for the first time. That's an amazing change. So they're a third force. They've always had maybe 5-10% of the vote. They're now up north of 10-12%, but they've got a lot of new seats. So that's great. And then we've got a new group called the Teals, which are independent moderates. It's the breakaway, effectively, of the Liberal Party, people who actually want rational, sensible government. And Liberals couldn't provide that, so they're now out in the wilderness, and we've got a four-party system. So it's a bit like the German model from what I can see, and I'm very hopeful that Australia can get back on the climate crisis and can actually play a positive role. But that's a lot. I've probably lost the question in all of that. Try to redirect me, Joseph.
Right. We were talking about the dynamics between the state government and the federal government, and how that, because the dynamic kind of broke down and you didn't have the federal government support, then you didn't really have the kind of clean energy growth that Australia could have had, while still, being a major exporter of fossil fuels. So if you could just talk a little bit more about those dynamics and how it broke down.
Yeah, so in the last couple of years, we've seen the states really commit to Paris. They've committed to aggressive targets and they've committed to independent action. And so that's been really the only saving grace of Australia in the last 3 years. So that's been a really positive aspect. Now we're having to reverse that because we've actually got a central government, a federal government that's wanting to work with the states, accepts the Paris Agreement, accepts the need and the opportunity of decarbonisation. But there's actually a third group in there that I'll really stress, and it's why Australia is actually still a renewable energy leader despite our federal government, and that is in fact the consumer. And so what Australia is the world leader in rooftop solar installs. So per capita, we've now got maybe 13 gigawatts of rooftop solar, not solar, rooftop solar. We've got a whole lot of solar in the utility scale, mega centralised power plant model, but literally every fourth or fifth house in Australia has a huge solar system on their roof. And we're starting to see batteries coming out, behind-the-meter batteries. Electric vehicles will play a key role in it. At the end of the day, Australia imports $20 billion a year of oil. Well, if we go and electrify our fleet of cars, 20 million cars are really just batteries on wheels. So I emphasise that. That's where I think the market's going to go. Our forecast is that the Australian energy market will have 50 gigawatts of rooftop solar by 2050. So within 28 years. Now, that is profound by any country's level, but when we're only 25 million people, that is a huge amount of solar. And so it means half the capacity and maybe a third of the generation will be on individual rooftops, both consumer and increasingly industrial and our commercial properties. And so it really throws the whole concept of having a national electricity grid transmission system totally on its head, because all of a sudden, whenever it's sunny, we have more power than you can poke a stick at. As soon as the sun goes down, you've got on-grid demand goes through the roof. So you move from what used to be called a baseload power market, like that is such an archaic term in Australia. It's absolutely the dinosaurs sort of concept, but it was only 10 years ago that we had a baseload market. Now we've got a peaking market because everyone's what we call a pro-consumer. We're a producer and a consumer. And so the consumption of each house with solar has gone down by 90%, but they export whenever it's sunny and then they import when the sun goes down. So it's actually a fundamental shift. So why did that occur in Australia? A, we've got the best solar resources in the world. B, we've got the lowest capital cost for installing rooftop solar in the world, because we've got brilliant engineers and electricians who run their own businesses. So you can literally ring up, order solar, and it can be on your roof a day later. It will take them 4 hours to install 6 or 8 or 10 kilowatts. And then that is 100% of your power needs for the next 25 years solved. But it creates a massive, massive grid challenge, because you all of a sudden, whenever it's sunny, demand on grid drops by 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100%. And we are now at the situation where it is dropping in South Australia 100% during the middle of the day every time it's sunny. And our energy market operator warned last year that Australia has to get ready for 100% instantaneous variable renewable energy by 2025 nationally. Now, no other market in the world is remotely like that. Now, that's not saying 100% renewables permanently, because once the sun goes down, we don't get the solar. It's windy at night, but what you've got is actually a really, really dynamic market, and the opportunities from that are huge. So I've really just deep dived in an aspect of the market. But what I'm getting at here is, if you screw the consumer for long enough, they will get you back. Well, Australia's proof in that. Our federal government has been damaging the energy sufficiency and structure of the Australian market. The Australian consumers have gone and taken the issue into their own hands, solved for it, invested 13 gigs. That's about $20 billion of investment in self-generation. Now we're going to go and build out a fleet of 10 or 20 million electric vehicles. We're going to put solar storage in the garage, and we're going to electrify everything and remove gas from the equation. So it's a fundamental shift.
So two quick follow-ups on that. One is, where did the 20 billion come from? How was all of that financed, is 13 gigawatts and growing? And secondly, what's happening on the energy storage side of things, so that you can kind of balance out the fact that, you don't have solar power at night?
Yeah, two really good questions there. Firstly, we have a very, very high housing market, private home ownership, and our house prices have gone mad. And so you can actually borrow against your house value. The banks are very happy to lend you. So that has literally been financed by the banks against their property values, and your property price goes up. You put $10,000 worth of solar on your roof, your house goes up in value to the value of the solar. So at the end of the day, it's been self-financed by the consumer. It's got a payback of 4 or 5 years, so it's entirely sensible. But what it's got is an unusual additional benefit. Now, the coal fleet will say it's a horrible cost. It's a cost to them. But what it means is, whenever my house is generating a lot of electricity, I can't use it all. I export it to the grid, and I'll export it for free. And so the power price goes to zero or negative for reliably 2 hours a day, and then it'll go to 3, 4, 5, 6 hours a day. And so what we've got, the situation is, the wholesale price of power will be negative in Australia regularly every day for 6 hours a day within 3, 4, 5 years. So there is a socialisation of that benefit, but it means you must upgrade the grid. You've got to adopt smart meters. You've got to adopt two-way flows of power and all sorts of changes. It encourages electric vehicles, because what do you do with all that power? You can't just put storage in your garage. You can, but it's quite expensive. But your batteries in a car, in a Tesla, are 10 times the storage capacity of your home energy management system. And so what we're literally talking about is 10 or 20 million batteries on wheels driving around. But most cars in Australia are stationary for 95% of their life.
Right.
So they're in fact just mega batteries on wheels. So we're looking at Australia as a potential microcosm of how the world market's going to change fundamentally from a centralized, big, dirty, carbon-intensive thermal power fleet, nuclear fleet, to a distributed energy model where the grid's got to be so much different, and IT is going to play a big role in it. So as to storage, we haven't yet seen electric vehicles roll out. The federal government was blocking the introduction of electric vehicles. Why? Because they love everything to do with fossil fuels. It's just sheer stupidity. Like the ex-Prime Minister said that electric vehicles would destroy the average Australian's weekend. I mean, it's just like mind-numbingly stupid. Moronic, I think was the word you used. I agree. We had a moron as Prime Minister, but worse, he was captured by the fossil fuel industry and sitting there regulating and stymieing I'll stop there. But we've got rid of him, and I'm now really optimistic that we've actually got government for the people of Australia, and Australia's just blessed. So therefore, we're going to embrace the opportunity. We've got the lowest cost utility solar in the world. We've got some of the lowest cost wind resources in the world. We've actually got really good offshore wind, but I just don't think it'll get developed because we're so blessed with onshore wind. So countries like Germany, Denmark, England, to a lesser degree, or China is now the biggest installer of offshore wind in the world. Japan will be, Korea will be, Taiwan will be, but Australia doesn't need to because we've got such good onshore wind and solar resources and we've got good hydro. But you asked about storage. I'll finish by saying Australia is actually the second largest battery storage market in the world, and that's developed in the last 2 to 3 years. We are building 10 of the 20 biggest batteries in the world. Every power generator in Australia is building some of the world's biggest batteries, and it's a race. Like 5 years ago, we installed the Tesla big battery down in South Australia, the royal we. Elon Musk did it along with Neon of France, and they built a 100 megawatt hour battery in South Australia in 100 days. Now it's small fry compared to the batteries that are 5 or 10 times bigger than it. And Australia's got 10 or 15 of the biggest batteries in the world. Only America's got a similar market of that, and yet we're a tenth of the size of America. And that comes because we've got a price-only market. So when I talk about the power price, the wholesale price being negative in the middle of the day in summer, it is then very high as soon as the sun goes down. So the value of 2 hours of storage is huge, and you get immediate payback. So some of these batteries are getting 2-3 year paybacks because they're effectively charging for free in the middle of the day and then getting paid $500 a megawatt hour 4 hours later. So you don't have to do that too many times to actually pay for the battery. So again, Australia, probably because of the energy chaos that Angus Taylor has instigated from the federal government level, has actually created a massive pilot study on how fast you can disrupt a market.
Can you talk about vehicles to grid? Because you mentioned a couple of times about, and I totally kind of endorse the fact that, you're going to have so many electric cars. And I think you mentioned that 5% of the time the car is driven and 95% is just idle. And I think the average in the world is, anywhere between 5 to 15%, depending on what you do with it, if you include some of the commercial vehicles as well. But, how's the technology? Because I do know that China is quite advanced. There's quite a few things happening in Europe. US actually started it off about 10 years ago, and then they kind of decided to put it on hold for some reason. I'm not sure why. Could you talk a little bit about that? Is there technology there?
Yeah, Joseph, it's a fascinating space, and Australia, yet again, is blessed despite ourselves. So we have one of the lowest uptakes of electric vehicles in the world. That's going to change rapidly, but we're literally sitting at 1.5% penetration of electric vehicles. We were less than 1% a year ago. Now, that will change really rapidly. But we also have a problem, and there is some rationale for that, because at the end of the day, we're one of the most sparsely populated countries in the world. So, most of us live in the city and we drive around the city, but when we have to drive to see our parents or our children, we've got to drive a round trip of 2,000 kilometres or 3,000. You can't use an electric vehicle unless you've got a bloody big battery in it. And you're going to do those trips maybe 5-10 times a year. So unless you end up with a sort of 2-car model where you have one for your long trips and one for your everyday, that can happen. But at the moment, it's embryonic. It's happening. We also have the fast charging company called Tritium, which is it was 100 or 95% export oriented company. It builds the best fast chargers in the world. It supplies most of them to Norway and to Europe. So we've actually got some smart engineers and scientists and financiers. But it's going to be interesting to see how that two-way batteries on wheels or vehicle-to-grid charging happens. Now, at the moment, we're not seeing vehicle-to-grid charging. We've got a largely one-way market. The market's not designed for it. The regulator is asleep at the wheel. We'll get back to the regulator. They've just had a crisis, as you started by mentioning. But it will happen, and it'll happen because when you look at the battery in a Tesla, it's 100 kilowatts of capacity. If I put a battery storage unit in my house, it'll be 10 kilowatts. So literally your car's going to have 10 times the battery. And I will drive my car maybe 5% of the time. Now, I'll know when I want to drive it down to Canberra or down to Melbourne or whatever, and that'll be one day a month. The other 29 days of that month, I'll be driving it for less than 5% of the time. So you literally, I can see a day within a couple of years where we will literally program, plug my car in wherever it is into the grid. During the day, it'll get charged for free. It'll be available for decharging at night, supplying to the grid. I'll say, you can run it down by 30%. Maybe 20, maybe 30, maybe 40. If I know I'm going on a long trip tomorrow, you can't run my battery down, but I'll get paid for that. And it'll just be an app on my phone. I can see that happening within 3 or 4 years. And so at the end of the day, you can't have, 100 gigawatts of renewable energy installed on the Australian grid without a massive amount of battery storage and electric. So I would have thought electric vehicles are inevitable in Australia so thank God China spent the last decade leading the world developing electric vehicles. BYD, CATL are world leaders. Okay, we hear about Tesla all the time, but the reality is the Chinese are the leaders. Tesla's in China for that very reason. And so I'm looking to China to transform the EV market, get the cost of those batteries down, get the cost of the EVs down, get the economies of scale. Australia imports them all anyway. And so that'll transform the market dramatically yet again in the next 5 or 10 years.
So I didn't want to make the whole kind of discussion about EV. I mean, that wasn't the topic. The topic was more about Australia's role as a future clean energy leader. But obviously, it's very, very key, because if Australia is building truckloads of new clean energy projects, and some of these projects are absolutely, like 10, 20 gigawatts. In a country, as you mentioned earlier, with 25, 26 million people is enormous on the clean energy side. So you do need the energy storage. And just to wrap up the conversation on vehicles, what about the whole kind of EV charging revenue model? I don't know if you have any views on that. I mean, there's very, very few, ways of, I don't think actually there's probably anywhere in the world an EV charging company that is making any money. So do you see any kind of revenue models that would work in Australia?
No, we've still got very, very limited penetration, but I do see, I've been working on the AGL energy debacle in the last 6 weeks, and so our biggest energy companies collapsed in value. It lost $10 billion in value. The boards just all resigned en masse because they're incompetent and they had to go. So that's been really interesting. But the real core value of AGL, it's got 4.5 million customers. Now, at the moment, they're not paying their way and getting a really good value, but it's the service model that comes. Like, my car needs to be charged. I'm not going to do that. My electricity provider is going to do it, and they're going to do it remotely for me every day using an app. So I see the model shifting, and I see Australia being a world leader in it. We're not there yet. We've got a long way to go, but no matter whether it's Australia has the highest rooftop solar penetration in the world. We've got the lowest cost per rooftop solar. And so we are going to be an interesting test case, if you like, for it. But Australia also, as you said, you talked about the scale of renewable energy for rooftops, but we also had a deal announced this week, which was BP just bought a 40% stake in the Asian Renewable Energy Hub, which is up in the Pilbara in Western Australia. It is a $30 billion project. It's one of the 3 or 4 biggest green hydrogen, green ammonia projects in the world. Okay, it's still a long way from fruition, but we're talking about 20, 30 gigawatts of wind and solar. And by the way, Australia's got 5 of these sort of projects underway already, and it's world scale. And the reality is we could do 50 of them. We've got that much land. We've got that much great wind and solar resources. So, but the capital requirements are huge. So Australia's also got a $3 trillion superannuation industry. We've got plenty of capacity. And one of the interesting aspects of the Ukraine war, Putin's invasion of Ukraine, has highlighted supply chain security. And so much as China is the world leader in a lot of these technologies, and I love watching their race to win on all of these fronts, a lot of the West is very anti-China. I think it's just a wrong strategy, but anyway, Australia's biggest trade partner is China. So Australia is tied at the hips to China. But at the end of the day, America obviously wants to contest China's leadership. That actually is another massive opportunity for Australia, because China is one of the biggest processors of all the raw materials that you need for decarbonisation of industry, of transport and of energy. And so Australia, as always, is blessed through sheer stupidity or luck. We are the biggest producer of lithium, I mentioned. We're one of the 3 biggest: nickel, copper, vanadium, you name it, rare earths. We do all of that. Iron, we're the largest exporter of iron ore in the world. We're one of the largest aluminium producers. We've got a zinc refinery up in Townsville owned by the Koreans, but it's on target to be a 100% green zinc refinery within 3 years. Right? That'll be a world-leading facility. And so we can, and how do you export electricity? Do it through processing, export your raw materials after you've processed them. So I'm not saying we do steel, but we're the biggest exporter of iron ore in the world. Why don't we export iron rather than iron ore, use our wind and solar resources, use our massive land mass, and do some of the decarbonisation of iron ore processing before we export it to China, Japan and Korea. Therefore, we do value adding. So I can see a real renaissance in mine refining going on in Australia, in lithium, in cobalt, in copper, in nickel, in aluminium, in bauxite, in iron, etc. So again, the lucky country despite ourselves.
So I'm going to get you to take your crystal ball out in a bit. But before we talk about kind of like relatively bright future, especially now with the new government for Australia on the clean energy side, can we talk a little bit about the current, for lack of a better expression, current mess that we're seeing in the energy markets in Australia? Could you just very, I know it's very complicated, so maybe explain that at a very, very high level. Is that just an answer to the question whether this is temporary? Do you see it resolved pretty soon or not?
I don't see it resolved quickly. And I mean, everywhere in the world at the moment is having hyperinflation in oil prices, in gas prices, in coal prices. The gas price has gone up 5-10-fold. The oil price has gone up 300%. The coal price, $400. It used to be $47 Newcastle US dollars export price. So it's up 8-fold in the space of 2 years. 8-fold, not 80%, 800%. So we've got hyperinflation globally. Now, the fact is Australia is normally blessed with opportunity, but because of the stupidity of our government, we've had the moron Prime Minister, saying we're going to have a gas-led recovery. What we've got is a gas-led crisis smashing our domestic economy right now. So as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, the Australian Energy Market Operator, the regulator, actually suspended the functioning of the national electricity market indefinitely. They've said they will review it each day from now on. We've never had that before. It's unprecedented. We've got a regulatory failure. We had 5 gigawatts of generating capacity, which is a big chunk of thermal capacity. withdrawn from the market yesterday. The energy market operator, the Australian energy regulator, told those generators, you have to come back online or else, we have, you're an essential service, you have to come back online. They gave the middle finger to the Australian energy regulator. And so 4:00 this afternoon, the Australian energy market operator suspended the functioning of our market and said, you will operate. And by the way, you're not even going to get paid for it now. So bugger just getting $300. They'd capped it at $300. We were seeing prices of $1,000 a megawatt hour every day in recent weeks. But as you said, I mean, there's a whole domestic mess of regulation, but it comes down to three factors. One, skyrocketing fossil fuel prices. Number two, the coal fleet in Australia is old and unreliable. So 30% of our fleet is offline in the middle of winter. That's a catastrophe in its own right. But when the gas price domestically has gone from $4, $5, $10 to $40, all of a sudden we've got hyperinflation in the domestic market. And that's in a market, it's obscene because Australia is the biggest exporter of gas in the world, yet we've got a gas shortage in our own market. So I've been calling out the absolute regulatory failure and the fact that this multinational gas cartel is screwing the 22 million Australians on the east coast of Australia. They're making war profits. They don't pay any corporate tax. They pay next to no royalties, and they're making obscene profits. And 22 million Australians are now suffering the same way as Europe's suffering, the same way as China, Japan, Korea is suffering. We've all got hyperinflation, but Australia's never had that before. And how can you be the third biggest exporter of energy in the world, yet you've got an energy shortage in your own country? That is a corruption of our democracy, and that's why we've just had a big change of government.
And so you don't see that kind of being resolved in the very short term. So number one, why do you think it may take a while before things, the dust settle? Obviously, high prices are not going to go away tomorrow morning because I don't think that Putin is giving up on Ukraine just yet, sadly. So question number one is why do you see this kind of like going on for quite some time, apart from the high fuel prices? And second question is, how does that affect the growth of clean energy projects and clean energy capacity in general?
Yeah, we're literally in the middle of a crisis that sort of exploded 2 weeks ago, and we've been watching it. It's been a rolling train wreck. Every day there's new problems. Now, part of it is when coal-fired power plants are the core part of your system, and for a decade our government has said, we love coal-fired power generation. The coal fleet's got older and older. It's a decade older than it was a decade ago, and it's increasingly unreliable. 30% of our fleet's offline. That's unprecedented in Australia, and that's a core problem, particularly when coal is 60% of your generation. Right, that is a problem, and it's not going to solve overnight. So it's all very well shouting about it, but at the end of the day, if the coal power plant blew up, as Callide did about 6 months ago, they won't be online again for another 6 months. They're rebuilding the plant, and we don't have one coal plant offline. We've got 3 gigawatts of units offline. That's about 5 of our 5 biggest coal plants. That's not going to change overnight. The gas price is not going to change overnight. It's gone up tenfold. We have export price parity and beyond in the domestic market. So we're going to have hyper energy inflation for a little while yet. Now, we just had a meeting of the energy ministers. They've committed to a $20 billion investment program in new grid transmission. So at the end of the day, we're a big country. We've got plenty of land. We've got plenty of wind. We've got plenty of solar. You actually need the grid modernisation and capacity to actually get the energy to the consumer. So that'll take a while to build. We can build solar projects rooftop in a day, utility scale in a year, Batteries can be built in a year. We can do that, no problem. We can do wind projects in 2 years. Snowy Hydro just made yet another announced delay to their development. Snowy Hydro is building one of the biggest hydro facilities in the world outside of China. It's a pumped hydro storage facility. It's enormous. It was meant to be online by 2021. Oh, that's right. That was 2 years ago. It was now going to be online 2025. Now it's 2026. Now, it's the core to actually building a huge amount of new renewables, because you need not only short-dated storage, you need long-dated storage, you need all sorts of different storages, you need diversity of supply. So at the end of the day, I'm expecting Australia to see probably $100 billion of new investment in transmission, pumped hydro storage, batteries, wind and solar, rooftop. We'll probably even do some offshore wind down in Victoria, because they're actually now planning for what happens when you get to 80, 90, 100% renewables. The wind patterns offshore are different to onshore. Now, offshore wind is very expensive in our country, as it is in Taiwan, for example. It's bloody cheap in Germany because they've done it at scale and they've got the right incentives, they've got the right capacity. We haven't done it before. But when you're talking about getting to 100% instantaneous renewables by 2025, when you're talking about getting 100% renewables by 2035, we're going to see $100 billion of new investment. The money is absolutely there. Like, we got a $3 trillion super fund. They haven't been able to invest in Australia because we haven't had the right policy framework. We had one renewable energy zone. So the state governments are building these renewable energy zones to maximise the value of transmission. You know, let's centralise the wind, do it as a hybrid wind solar project. You probably do some hydrogen there. You probably have a battery there. So you can actually build 3, 4, 5, 10 gigawatts in one little region and then have a pipeline getting back to one of the major cities. And we had one of those projects. It was meant to be 3 gigs. They got 40 gigawatts of expressions of interest, $100 billion in one location in Australia, in one renewable energy zone. The money is queued up, ready, willing and able to go. And that's the same answer in Australia as in India, as in America, as in China, as in it will be the way we rebuild Ukraine. I mean, I would hope the European governments does a massive rebuild of Ukraine. Why? They're going to need it. Russia's destroying their economy, but they have brilliant wind and solar. They've just depopulated the country, so they can actually rebuild and they can become the renewable energy hub of Europe. So we are actually going to see hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars invested, and that will unlock zero emissions, deflation and grid reliability because it brings diversification. So it's a positive win for the consumer and the industry, but that's going to take 5 years to build out.
In Australia, I mean, if I was going to put my money into transmission, distribution, renewables, number one, I mean, right now I'm seeing, if I'm a foreign investor, I'm seeing a energy crisis, which kind of doesn't really bode very well in terms of safe returns, low risk, low return kind of investment. So how do you see, the returns on these investments, given that the whole energy market is in a little bit of a mess? I mean, is it going to be corporate PPAs? Is it going to be some kind of steady returns from, or set returns, I should say, from transmission and distribution? How do you see the returns game on that front?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was being hit today with the question, Australia spent the last 20, 30 years privatising all of our energy assets, and we're now paying the price for it. So it really begs the question, is essential infrastructure, should it be in the hands of private individuals or private corporations? Should it be in the hands of foreign multinationals? And should it be an essential service and owned by the government? So Australia's pretended we're a democracy and we've pretended we're a free market. Well, we're paying the price for the regulatory capture of our democracy, as is America, as is India, as is Europe. So all sorts of problems emerging. But for transmission, it is an essential service. It's a monopoly. So in Australia, it's a regulated asset. What we're seeing is that pumped hydro storage is really problematic. It's a really expensive, long-dated technology. It's got a lot of core value to the market. How do you value that? It's not something that the private industry can actually, you can't get revenue clarity for 50 years. So I would argue the only good pumped hydro storage is going to be built by the government. And then maybe once it's operational, they could then privatise it. At the end of the day, you lock in its regulated rate of return or whatever. The market's very happy to value infrastructure and regulated assets. I wouldn't actually... You mentioned it's hard to build renewables when there's so much variability. What it actually highlights absolutely perfectly is that we've had an energy market for 50 or 100 or 200 years, which is about commodities. And with commodities comes rampant up and down swings. So the commodity volatility has been extreme, never more extreme than the last 3 years globally. What renewables are is a financial instrument. You know exactly how much they're going to cost to build. You know how much power they're going to generate every year for the next 25 years. You can do a financial construct. You have absolute financial certainty on the price of power generated. Now, you can't guarantee it'll happen today. It might be overcast. It might be raining. But you know over a year how much solar you're going to get. You know how much wind you're going to get. It's a financial construct. It's eminently bankable. It's just a different system. It's a move away from commodities to a financial construct.
Sorry, go ahead.
When you've built a solar project, it's a cash flow annuity for 25 years, and maybe it'll last for 30 years, so you get some cream at the end. So it's about actually creating different instruments. Now, I'll pivot to India, because India actually has really, the Indian energy minister 7 years ago, Piyush Goyal, was so far ahead of his time. He was unbelievable. That's why I started following India. This guy was brilliant. He still is. He's unfortunately not the energy minister. I think he's the railway minister or the finance minister or something. No, he's the railway minister. Anyway, so what he did was he said, look, we want to build massive amounts of renewable. India has brilliant wind and solar resources. We have a coal-dependent fleet. We import a lot of gas. We import a lot of oil. If we're going to decarbonise, we need to use domestic resources. We've got water, we've got wind, we've got solar, and we've got coal. Let's use all of them. And what he said was, let's do 25-year power purchase agreement underwritten by the central government of India. And so therefore you immediately de-risk it. They made a cash flow certainty proposition because the state distribution companies are all bankrupt or almost all bankrupt. So they removed the power from the states, took it to the central government, underwrote corporate PPAs, did them at 10 gigawatt scale, and were bowled over with hundreds of billions of dollars of global investor interest. And now, fast forward 7 years, India did $15 billion of renewable energy investments in the last 12 months. They did 15.4 gigawatts. Double what they did the year before. My forecast is they'll double again in the next 2 years. The only question is, will they double this year or will it take 2 years? But India should be doing 30 or 40 gigawatts of wind and solar every year from now on for the next 50 years. Now, that sounds obscenely big, but China's been doing that for 5 years. China's going to do 108 or 110 or 120 gigawatts of solar this year alone, just solar. They'll then do 40 gigs of wind. So the market, the scaling up involved, this is an industrial process. Now, why would a country like India do it? It's all about energy security. It's all about energy independence. Oh, and by the way, it's deflationary. It is also zero emissions. It diversifies your grid. There are 5 great, there's no water involved. India's got a water scarcity problem. Who's the biggest user of water in India other than the farmers? It's the coal industry. And so you've actually got all these solutions that come about by building energy security, energy independence. And by the way, Modi spent the last 3 years building out supply chain certainty because he wanted to divorce the Indian economy from over-reliance on China. So he's building 30 gigs of solar manufacturing capacity so he gets the vertical integration. Now, that's come at some cost, but what all of that comes down to, it's a financial construct. And if, by the way, you can either buy Indian government bonds giving you an 8% return if you're a foreign investor, or you can buy a solar project and it gives you a 10% government guaranteed return for 25 years. Well, why would you care whether it's solar or a bond? You got the same guarantee, same guarantor, you got the same duration. So at the end of the day, India's unlocked massive amounts of capital. I was delighted to see Brookfield just built one of their biggest solar projects in the world in India. They took them 6 months to build it. It's 455 megawatts. And then you read the press and they go, by the way, we're doing 5 gigs in the next 5 years. That's the first time Brookfield's built solar or any renewable asset in India, and they're not going to do one, they're going to do 10 of them, and then they'll do another 10 behind it because BlackRock's done the same deal. So Brookfield did it. BlackRock did it with Tata Power, one of the doyens. We just had Total announce today a investment with Adani. They're building, $50 billion worth of green hydrogen powered by wind and solar in India. Why would you do that? Because India is one of the biggest markets in the world for energy. It's got a massive energy security problem, and India is one of the biggest oil refiners in the world. So you can put green hydrogen straight into your refinery. They've got 800 million farmers who rely on fertilizers. So you've got one of the biggest fertilizer, ammonium nitrate fertilizer markets in the world. So I think India is going to be one of the most exciting hydrogen markets in the world. Now, hydrogen might be 5% of the world's energy system by 2050, 2060, but India will be one of the biggest markets, like Australia will be. Hydrogen's not going to be 20% of the world system, but 1 or 5% is still a bloody big leap. It's going to scale up 10, 20, 50, 100-fold. And Total's just done this deal with Adani, the richest man in Asia. He's got a race on against Reliance Industries, who's also committed $50, $100 billion to building out renewable powered hydrogen by 2030. The Indian government's sitting there cheering away because Reliance is going, we can do green hydrogen for $1 a kilogram by 2030. Well, that changes everything. And by the way, it enhances energy security. It gives energy independence from rampant fossil fuel inflation, and it protects the current account of India. It reduces the inflation pressure, it reduces the interest rate pressure, and it creates a huge $100 billion of investment in new jobs in India. So it's a really exciting story, and Prime Minister Modi's really embraced it. Ambani, the second richest man in India, he was the richest man, Adani's now the richest man. Those three guys are absolutely seeing the opportunity for India to go from being dependent on imported fossil fuels to being a world leader in renewables. It's actually really exciting.
So talking about the third and last part of the podcast, of the interview, talking about the future long term, right? So one of the things that you mentioned is, I asked you, there's an energy mess right now in Australia. Obviously, that's going to last for some time, but it's 3 months, 6 months out. Kind of hopefully the part of the dust is going to settle. We don't know if price of fossil fuels will be lower 3 or 6 months from now, but we know that they're going to be peaking relatively soon, at least in my personal view. Now, one important factor about the growth of clean energy in Australia is also the fact that now you've got a government that believes in climate change, that is supporting clean energy. So that's also going to lower your risk element, which means your cost of capital should also theoretically come down, so making clean energy investments even more attractive. At least that's my conclusion. I'm not sure if you agree with that, but could you just because you've been around a very, very long time, how do you see the clean energy landscape shaping out in the next 20, 30 years?
Yeah, thanks for saying I'm really old.
I only by experience, only from experience.
No, I'm joking. Yeah, it is amazing to watch. And I actually, as you can tell, hopefully from the enthusiasm of the excited answers I'm giving you and the elongated answers, this is a huge once-in-a-lifetime industrial revolution, and Australia and India, places like Texas and California are leading. Chile could lead the world. It's really changing the global geopolitics of energy for the positive, because it's actually helping solve the climate crisis. But yeah, Australia, what you need is a huge amount of land. Like, let's not underestimate how much land is required. If you're, rather than just digging up oil out of the ground or digging up coal out of the ground, you're actually going to have to put solar over the land. You're going to use a huge amount of land. But what's Australia got more land than any other country, almost, other than Russia? But we've got better solar than Russia. They got pretty good wind. We got brilliant wind and we got brilliant solar. We've got some of the best solar in the world, as does Rajasthan and Gujarat, as does Texas and California and Arizona, as does Chile. So it changes the geopolitics. China's got some brilliant wind and solar resources. They got some pretty good deserts. So deserts go from being a pain in the ass to actually being a brilliant national resource. And India is surprising. Most people go, hang on, India, land population density is really high. It is, but if you look at the river delta, the Ganges Delta, the population density is extreme, but get away from the river deltas and the land population density goes right down. And so India's is blessed with a very good solar resource and some areas of low population density. There will be impacts. We have to acknowledge solar is very land intensive, but I'll tell you what's more land intensive than solar. It's biodiesel. One of my colleagues, Dr. Charles Warringham, just did a report saying biodiesel is 100 times more land intensive than solar. So it's criminal for India to be doing biodiesel, but they are. Why? Because they import all their oil and they've got an oil security problem. But biodiesel is not the answer. Electric vehicles are the answer. So a little off track. But Australia, we are blessed with huge amounts of land, low population density, huge capital system. We're trusted, despite our government, we are a trusted energy player at the global scale. We're the world's biggest exporter of coal. We have 55% of the world's coking coal market, export coking coal. We're biggest supplier of LNG in the world. So Japan and Korea, maybe China less so, doesn't trust Australia thanks to our federal government. We've just kicked out, thankfully, but they've been poking China. Don't poke the bloody bear too many times or he'll bash you, and China has bashed us, but we deserved it. So at the end of the day, we're a trusted supplier, and we've also, I'll go back to iron ore. We export $100 billion of iron ore every year. No, China's going to be using a lot of iron ore for the next couple of decades. China's committed to decarbonisation, so is Korea, so is Japan. The world has to decarbonise. But we've actually got the wind and solar that can drive a third of the processing of iron ore into steel, and you can do that using really cheap wind and solar in Pilbara. So I expect Australia is going to get an industrial resurgence in valuating our resources. So whether it's building, we've got probably 5 of the 10 or 20 biggest hydrogen projects in the world under proposal. They're not being built, they're proposed, but each of them is $30 to $50 billion. I mentioned one of them, BP's bought into one of them today, but the reality is there's 5 mega projects. Now, I expect Rajasthan to compete with Australia, but it's a different market. We're an export market. So we've got relatively stable government, we've got huge land, we've got great wind and solar, we've got the capital markets, we've got the engineering capacity to do things at world scale. Why would we not do it? And so I am pretty bullish. And Australia 5 years ago, 1 or 2 of our really forward-thinking energy experts started talking about, let's not aim for 100% renewables, let's aim for 700%. And at the time, it just seemed like a dream. But the reality is some of these projects are the biggest energy projects in the world, like 50 gigawatts each. And they're 100% decarbonised, and the world needs to decarbonise. The climate science is categorically clear. The climate crisis is real. We need to invest $100 trillion in redesigning the capital energy flows of the world in the next 28 years if we're going to have a livable planet. Well, $100 trillion is an enormous bloody investment opportunity. China's going to get a big chunk of it. America will get a chunk of it. Europe will. So will India. So will Australia. Probably Chile as well, because they've got brilliant solar resources. So at the end of the day, it's a huge, huge multi-trillion-dollar opportunity. The biggest question in my mind is, will it ever be viable to export hydrogen commercially? I mean, hydrogen makes LNG look easy. You only export LNG at minus 132 degrees Celsius. Hydrogen, you have to do it at minus 250 degrees. So it's obscenely cold. Now, maybe ammonia becomes the carrier of the energy, but that's got a lot of inefficiencies. But if your wind is virtually free once you build it, your solar is virtually free once you build it, if you can capture it at that sort of scale, we're going to see wind and solar priced at $10 or $20 a megawatt hour. And the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans will kill for that sort of pricing. So it's how do we get it to them? And the answer is going to be in ammonia, in my view. It'll have a lot of costs in processing to get it to ammonia. But at the end of the day, Japan buys our coal. They're trialling gigawatt scale coal conversions, coal blended fleets, where instead of burning coal, you burn a blend of green ammonia and coal. And why not then convert it to 100% green ammonia? It's not efficient, it's not cheap, but nothing's going to be cheap for energy for Japan. They're a rich country. They've committed to decarbonisation, and LNG is not cheap at all right now either.
And I think, your insight is absolutely totally brilliant, because what we're talking about is not just the, decarbonisation of Australia, building truckloads of clean energy, but you're talking about really an industrial revolution that is driven from the clean energy. And, the capital is there, the interest is there. And this is not looking at a crystal ball, like I always say, but it's actually looking at, a track record. I mean, this Asia hub, it will take, 10 years to build, but it is in progress. It's not something which is on a piece of paper, being discussed. I mean, some elements of it are already taking place. So I think it's a really, really key development. And hopefully, the federal government will continue. The federal government will continue to actually support this. So I don't know. Is there any kind of concluding remarks or concluding thoughts that you want to share, Tim?
Yeah, I think you've just summarised it pretty well. I would emphasise we're in the middle of an energy crisis. We're in the middle of a climate crisis, and we've got hyperinflation, like obscene fossil fuel-driven hyperinflation. We're about to go into a potential recession globally because of it. Let's remember that renewables are massively deflationary. The Chinese are so far ahead of the game, and they're building solar manufacturing facilities. There's one which I've just been watching for 2 years. It's meant to be a 60 gigawatt integrated solar manufacturing facility. Like the world 10 years ago was building less than 60 gigawatts, and China's doing it in one factory. They're doubling and doubling again their manufacturing scale. So China's, it's just an amazing country, but the scale they're applying drives huge ongoing deflation. And so it's not the polysilicon, or what is it, the Moore's law, but it's Swanson's law. It's equivalent to it, which is every time you double capacity, prices drop by 20% or something. And that learning curve is ongoing. So in the middle of a crisis, I'll emphasize renewables are massively deflationary. They're clean. And we have the convergence of heavy industry, transport and power markets. And for Australia, we've got the mining industry as well. So that's a key supply chain issue. You've got the convergence of three massive sectors, and you've got the science telling you've got to do it anyway. And the longer we stuff around and delay, the faster the change has to happen. And we've got the price signal in interesting markets. We haven't even talked about carbon pricing, but Europe's got a very good carbon pricing system. China's now got a national ETS. And so I think carbon pricing will be sort of the wild card that has to drive it. Because at the moment, fossil fuel producers get away with the massive externality. And it's a tax on everyone. Well, let's tax the problem, because as soon as you do that, you level the playing field and then let the best technology win. I tell you who'll win. It'll be wind, it'll be solar, it'll be electric vehicles, and the fossil fuel industries will go the way of the horse and buggy. But we're going to have a little bit of pain in the meantime. But don't waste a good crisis. This is an industrial transformation. The opportunities for some countries are enormous. The supply chain security benefits for everyone. Like, how many wars have been fought by the Americans Americans in the Middle East over energy security. We can actually say goodbye to that if we can actually get energy independence in key countries, and it redefines the geopolitical landscape globally. It gives an enormous win to a country like India, the biggest democracy in the world, the fourth biggest economy in the world, an emerging major. It gives China the perfect opportunity to dismantle American economic leadership, and Europe in the meantime is driving it. So we actually get a safer geopolitical landscape, in my view, because fossil fuel industry goes into decline, and that's a good thing for the world, let alone the survivability of our planet.
Tim, given the times today, I think a little bit of a bright outlook is really, really needed. Look, I really want to thank you for your time. I know that I caught you at a really bad time, given that there's, as I mentioned, this energy crisis going on, and it's going to keep you quite busy. So I just want to thank you for participating in the Asia Climate Capital podcast.
Thank you very much. Great to be with you, and enjoy your time in Portugal.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the Asia Climate Capital podcast. If you want more information, or you would like to send some comments or ideas for future topics, our contact is in the show notes. Thank you again.